Welcome to Class Act Coaching, a podcast for teachers and instructional coaches. This show is brought to you by the Southern Regional Education Board. At SREB, we believe every one of you deserves a coach. Whether you're inspiring students or guiding teachers, let our school improvement team be your coach this week. Well, welcome back to Class Act Coaching. As usual, I am Ashley, and once more we have with us Jason Adair. Thank you for being here, Jason.
Hello. Thanks for having me, Ashley.
It is great to see you again. Last week, you were here because you introduced me to Christi Edwards, who helped us answer the question of how do I transfer skills so that they're not just passing an assignment or even a test or even my class, but going on and being able to use that in higher level assessments or higher level classes or state assessments or whatever it would be, and getting through those as well. And Christi did a great job, so thank you for setting me up with her. But she also had so much more to say because that is a big question that I asked her. So we divided this up into two parts, and this week we're going to do the second half. But before we get into that, can you just kind of give us a summary of what we learned in the first half before we go on to our next tips?
Sure, Ashley. Just to remind our listeners, the first two tips, Christi her first tip centered around creating students who are curious. And when we create students who are curious, that's how we get them to be deep thinkers, so that they're not just kind of task-oriented, but they're asking questions of their own and thinking about things in a deeper level than those kind of rote tasks that we give kids over and over again. If we're going to have kids transfer their knowledge, they have to be curious. So the second tip that Christi gave was centered around active engagement. We want our kids to be actively engaged in the task. And the big theme of the discussion last week was centered around planning. None of this happens without quality planning. And so we want our teachers to be spending time planning questions, tasks, that students to be curious and actively engaged.
All right. Well, I loved both of those tips, but Christi told us that she had 4 tips for us. So now what I want to do is go back and hear the last 2 tips from Christi. Thank you so much again for helping me with this.
I'll see you at the end.
How about we move on to point 3?
Okay, good. So we're wrapping up active participation and knowing that it's purposeful and it's interactive tasks that keep them engaged and develop high levels of thinking. Now, focus area 3 falls right along with that, but we're turning it, and instead of it being more of our responsibility to create something, focus area 3 is on supporting students in self-regulating their thinking. Self-regulation equips students to monitor their progress, to adjust their strategies, and to take ownership of their own learning. It is essential for success in both the classroom and on assessments. And I'll take it a step further, and in life. If students can learn early on how to self-regulate, it's going to help them in relationships. It's going to help them in their jobs. It's going to help them in all types of experiences. But today we're focusing on in the classroom. So I'll keep it there for now. So in a self-regulation, that's often when I use that phrase, sometimes teachers aren't quite sure what I'm talking about.
I feel like I have an idea of what self-regulation is, but can you maybe explain it a little more or give an example for us?
Absolutely. I definitely will, because it's important that we know exactly what that means and we don't just sit quietly and assume we do. So self-regulation, it's critical for academic success. And Zimmerman in 2002 emphasizes that self-regulation is not a mental ability or an academic skill. Rather, it is the self-directed process by which learners transform their mental abilities into academic skills. And that's a mouthful. Okay, so we're going to break it down even further. Okay, so that's true, every bit of that. It's not testing them on their academic skills. It is instead, we're asking them to self-regulate, to stand up for themselves and identify where they are in the learning. How do they feel confident? Do they feel somewhat confident? Do they need a little guidance, or are they completely lost? So when we put it into students' hands to self-regulate, and sometimes people will say advocate for yourself. It is similar to advocating for yourself, but we're teaching students to be responsible for their own learning. I worked with a fourth grade teacher, and she was honest with me. This has been about 2 months ago. And the teacher struggled with students who performed well on classroom tasks, just like we've been saying. But then when it came time for I'm just going to say quarterly checks, on their quarterly assessment, she and her coach were sitting down talking with me, and they were like, they seem to be getting it. But I asked them, do you have any questions? And nobody raised their hands. And I'm like, if everybody got this, give me a thumbs up. They'll give them a thumbs up. But just because someone gives you a thumbs up, does that mean that student truly understands it? And it's a good strategy. Don't get me wrong. I do 5 with my students often. I'll say, okay, sir, if you think you could teach this to your peer next block, give me a 5. If you think that you can help your neighbor beside you feel very comfortable helping them, maybe not teach it, give me a 4, and so on and so forth. And so we have that conversation regularly. But I had to teach that to them. I had to teach that classroom routine of self-regulation so that they knew what that meant in that context. And so one thing that we talked about, and actually the coach asked me, she said, well, when we do that, is like a checklist a good idea? I said, there are tons and tons and tons of resources, and I will include those. I will include those in the notes to go along with this, so we can post.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome, because I could go on for days about it. But yes, I'll give resources on each of these 4 areas. So just so that your listeners, I will be providing some resources to support what we're talking about. These are just a few examples. But she said checklist, or how about, because they were in 4th grade, one thing that they were working on was having their students to journal, to be reflective journalers. And I said, I love it. That's absolutely a great way to. And she said, okay, I think I've got it. And she said, okay, so what about in my science unit that we're about to come up to? Could you help me sit down and think about some ways that we could prepare now so that when we're ready to teach this unit, we can really coach our students through how to self-regulate? I said, absolutely. I said, well, it doesn't matter what the content area is, but some questions that you might want to start with that are pretty basic questions that a 4th grader could understand. Or you might just have some bullet points on the board and say, guys, all throughout this lesson, all throughout this unit, we're going to keep coming back to these 3 questions. Do I understand the question? You're asking yourself, do I understand the question? What strategy will I use? And does my answer make sense? And if we can have students in every subject area to ask themselves those 3 questions on a regular, then we're providing them with a support system. And I went back to that toolbox. They've got to have the tools in their toolbox that they can pull out at a moment's notice. And it needs to be clockwork. It doesn't need to be, oh, let me go to my toolbox and find that. We need for them to be able to think, okay, here's a problem that they proposed to me. And it could be about genetics or something in a science class. And they posed a problem. And the student needs to read the problem. And they need to ask themselves, do I understand this question? And if not, what am I going to do? How am I going to advocate for myself? Maybe I want to raise my hand and ask the teacher if she would mind rereading it for me. Maybe the teacher wants to, when she gets that, maybe she wants to work with them. Oh, okay. So I know you do word problems in math and you have some strategies for annotating. I know you do it in English and you have annotation. Why don't we annotate this and try to follow a method that they hear in other classes as well? A lot of research supports that. If we, especially on a grade level, can all be using the same annotation tools or strategies, that students aren't having to annotate in one class differently than they do in another and another, then that's going to support their understanding and help them be better at self-regulating. And then she said, well, what about the stop and check? She said, I don't even really know what that is, Christi. well, what's a stop and checkpoint? And I said, do you mean a stop and think checkpoint? She said, sure. That sounds great. We giggled. I said, that's just during independent work. So when students are working independently, I often will have a pause. I have a little bell thing that I ring. It's not really a bell. It's a clicker that rings like a bell. And I'll say, okay, pencils down, guys. I want us to stop where you're at right now. And I want you to think. I want you to stop and think on your own work. Okay. I want you to look at your thinking written, and I want you to think about it up here. And just give some time to it. Engage yourself where you're at right now. And a lot's ways, again, to be able to gauge themselves. You can do a 3, 2, 1. 3 means I'm doing great. 2, I could use a little assistance. And 1, I'm really struggling to get started. But whatever your process or your routine is going to support them. And what that I found, and I was a high school classroom teacher. I also taught at the college level, as I mentioned earlier. But as an instructional coach, I work with kindergarten through 12th grade teachers, coaches, and in turn, they help students. And this works at all grade levels, I think. And it's pretty simple. We have cups, a red cup, a green cup, and a yellow cup. And there's a lot of different ways to use those as feedback tools. But if we're talking about self-regulation, the students have these cups. And the cups serve as a nonverbal system in which the students can communicate their feedback to the teacher. They can give them feedback as to how they're doing. And so that helps the teacher know who she needs to address. So let's say they're doing progress monitoring and they have the routine of how they're walking around the room and they are supporting students. The cups can also help them decide how much time they might need to spend with a particular student. If I look out and I see a whole lot of red cups, or I see a whole lot of green cups, then that gives me feedback knowing where we're at and how we're doing there. I will provide in the notes also some other ways that you can use that strategy, because you can use it with whole groups. You can use it with small groups. You can use it on a project. You can use it on independent. But I found a lot of success with that. And as a coach, as I've been going in classrooms, I've seen it used different ways as well. But it's just a tangible. Sometimes students need something to touch versus just showing a number. So whatever your strategy is, I just want to put in there that it's important that you have that posted somewhere in your classroom. I really believe in anchor charts a lot. And I feel that what the research states, that anchor charts in a classroom help students to recall information on assessments when they're no longer hanging in the room during the assessment. If they have seen that within the classroom, then they can recall that information. The same thing with classroom routines. It's very important that we communicate that effectively with them and that we give them a structure, a support system for it.
Well, what I'm about to say it sounds a little silly to me now, but one thing I really like that you talked about was on the reflection or on the stopping and asking them as they go. I am big into, I would say in my classroom, I'm really big into reflection. I think reflection is so important. And I always, at the end of an assignment, have them write a little reflection on how did that assignment go? How did this go? At the end of the semester, how did the semester go? What would you have done different? If you were writing a letter to a student that coming into this class, what would you recommend they do based on your experience? But as I was listening to you, I was like, what I just said was after the assignment, after the end of the semester, I do these things. Why am I not doing it all throughout? Why am I waiting until the end when they're done with the assessment and not halfway through the unit, halfway through whatever we're learning, stopping and being like, okay, let's reflect now when you could actually do something about it and fix it.
And that's a good point, because I'm sure if all teachers are honest, we've all been guilty of that at times too. So don't beat yourself up. That is something that we learn from experience. And we learn from opportunities like this where we can talk with one another and share things that are working and share things that we tried that didn't work perfectly and we had to adjust. And that's the biggest thing. You mentioned reflection and how you're so supportive and believe in reflection. If we're not reflective practitioners, then our students suffer. As a coach, if I'm not a reflective instructional coach for SRAB, then my coaches suffer because I'm not giving them the best version of myself. And in turn, the same thing as teachers if we're not. And it's a domino effect. But it truly is. There are tons of ways that we can build capacity within our learners and for me, within my coaches, so that they're equipped with different ways that they can self-regulate. But I think that that's just something that I don't know that we always get a lot of training on when we are becoming teachers. And if we think about today, we have a lot of teachers who are non-certified teachers or non-traditional teachers. And when I say traditional, I mean they didn't go to school for 4 years to be a teacher. They're coming in from second careers. And so as our supports, our coaches, we have to be cognizant of that. And we have to think about, okay, what are some things that we can do to help them understand these aspects they might not have been introduced to before. So when I was asked to do this podcast, I really got to thinking about what are if I had to narrow it down to 4, what are 4 focus points? And so I wanted to make sure self-regulation was in there because that's one that I feel like I don't see as much of, and it really is very powerful.
It sounds like it. I'm glad you worked that one in when you picked your 4.
Good. Can I share one more example? It'll be quick.
Go for it.
Okay, so one last example that I want to share for self-regulating that was shared with me by a fellow coach here at SRAB. And she said that a lot of us use exit tickets. And we use exit tickets for formative assessment, individual assessment, so that we can use that to drive our instruction for the next day. Did they get it? Did they partially get it? What are my common misconceptions? And that's absolutely a perfect way to use an exit ticket. But the way that she used this exit ticket was she said she had baskets, and the baskets were labeled in such a way that it gave them feedback. It gave her feedback as to how well they thought they did on the exit ticket. So they worked with specific problems similar to what they've been doing in class, and they didn't have all exactly the same, but they were all the same type level question. And when they were walking out the door, they were to put the exit ticket in the appropriate basket. And it was, I think she might have been in 5th grade. If I remember, she was working with a 5th grade teacher. And so she had little images, little emojis on the front of the basket. And so like the first basket was the emoji with both thumbs up. And so that meant that the student really, really got it. That's how they thought they did. So they're self-regulating how they think their response to this is and puts it in that basket. And then the next one was like a little, I think I got it kind of question. And so if you thought you did pretty good, but you might need some support, you put it in this basket. And if the third one was, I struggled, but I tried, they might be like, and have little question marks up in the air. And so they put it in that basket. So it gave her an opportunity to do 2 things. One, she still used the exit ticket as an assessment tool, a formative assessment. But she also could look at how the students were reflecting on their own thinking and evaluating themselves. How are they? So when they left that room, they either felt, well, I tried. Everybody tried. But I hope tomorrow when I come back in, because I put it in the I need help question, I hope she addresses this. And she said that the teacher said 2 things to her. Number one, she had never used it in that manner and she loved it. And then 2, also, she said it was powerful for her because a lot of hers that were in the 3rd that said they didn't think they understood it really did well. They might have just made a careless mistake. So they technically should have been in the middle. So she could have a conversation with them about what it means to be confident in their thinking. And that took a whole different avenue or a whole different perspective. Excuse me. That's what I was trying to, a perspective on it. They had to reflect on their misconceptions. And as a teacher, that's what we should always do with those exit tickets is take a look, find our common misconceptions, look at those, you can do different strategies the next day, whether it's my favorite no or what, but somehow address those. If we just leave those exit tickets to next Friday to look at, we're missing the boat. They're supposed to help drive our instruction for the next day.
I love that. I think that's a great use of the exit tickets.
Good. So you might try that, Ashley, huh?
I definitely might try it.
Okay, all right. So summarizing that, we're going to teach students, we're going to focus on teaching students to self-regulate their thinking because it empowers them to independently approach challenges and demonstrate strategy and mastery through their thinking. And so this prepares them for those assessments like our district and our state are giving us that are at a higher GOK level.
All right. Well, I've loved these so far, and I'm sure I'm going to love the fourth and final strategy that you have for us today. So what is that?
Okay. Well, the first one I've hit on in a certain way in each of these, and that was intentional. There's a word that I kept saying throughout here, if you picked up on it, and it was thinking. I really am working very hard with all of my teachers, coaches, students to transition from thinking about showing me your work to showing me your thinking. And I will give Building Thinking Classrooms, Peter Liddell, the credit for this. He talks about building thinking math classrooms, but these strategies that he shares work in all contents. It's not just math. It's getting our students to be able to think before they do the work, to like problem solve, strategize, talk to one another. So this last one, our focus area 4, is encouraging students to communicate their thinking and question the thinking of others. Two very important things: being able to communicate their thinking and question the thinking of each other's. If we can get them to do that, just think about our future leaders, because that's what we're doing, guys. As educators, we are preparing our future leaders of our world. And so we really need to remind ourselves that on a daily basis. When students can articulate their reasoning and engage in collaborative dialogue with one another, they refine their understanding and they enhance their ability to solve complex problems. And to be quite honest, you will watch their confidence level come up tremendously. It helps with that low mathematical identity or low, just not feeling like they can do things on their own. It builds that capacity with them. And Vygotsky, social constructivist theory, he really focused on this, and he's one of my faves, that learning occurs through interaction and dialogue. And he's quoted as saying, "Through others, we become ourselves." And this was a poster I had in my classroom many moons ago. And my students would be, "Ms. Edwards, what does that even mean?" And I said, "I don't know. What do you think? Everybody grab an index card. We're going to take a 2-minute reflection. Tell me what you think it means." And that was on the fly because I had really probably had that up there for 3 or 4 years. And I would say it a lot, but my students never questioned me on that. The day the little boy did, I went, "I love it." And so they were like just writing down. And I took those that afternoon and I read through them. And it gave me a window into the soul of many of the students sitting in my class. And I loved it. And so we came back the next day and I had chose a couple that I shared out. And I said, why don't we as a class come up with a collect rewriting of this quote? And I said, let's make our own class quote based on this. And it was really phenomenal. But I love that. Through others, we become ourselves. And so it encourages students to be collective collaborators on anything that they're doing. When allowed, obviously not on assessments, on these practices that we're doing in our class, these instructional tasks.
And I love that example just shows you practicing what you preach, because it was not you answering a question. It was you encouraging the questions and also having them think about it and come up with the answers themselves. So it's exactly what you've been saying this whole time.
Because if I had just turned around and said, "Oh, me, that, and da-da-da," guess what? 90% of them just tuned out. Because if it wasn't exactly what they were thinking, they think they're wrong. And so we can't do that to our students. We've got to give them time to really embrace it and think what it means to them, because that goes back to our very first one. It's got to be purposeful. It's got to be purposeful. They've got to be engaged in the learning, and it's got to be rigorous enough that it's going to prepare them for those assessments. When I was coaching a middle school class, I was talking with a teacher. Well, she came to me with a problem, and it was just what we're talking about today, that the students weren't performing as well on assessments as she had hoped, and she was shocked because it was her best class and that they were really, really not performing at the level she wanted. And she said, but they really won't talk. I can't get them to talk. And I said, well, that's not a problem that I've never heard before. I hear that a lot, but we have to teach students how to communicate their thinking. And it is an art, but it's also something that we can begin at a very basic level and build upon. It's not going to happen overnight. You got to give yourself grace as a teacher, but you've also got to step out of your comfort zone a little bit and give them opportunities to do so. And you become the listener and they become the voice. They become the ones that are very student-centered classroom and they're doing the talking.
And can I put a plug right there that if that's an issue you're having a few weeks ago in your class, a few weeks ago, Keisha King came on and she was our coach and her episode was on how to get that conversation in your class going, how to get students to talk about that. And she talked about that in more detail than what we're going to say here.
Perfect. That's right. So everyone go back and listen to Keisha's if you haven't already. I have, and it's very good. Very good. Excellent. So what we did, the teacher and I just talked for a few minutes, and she said, I know that students come to me in middle school and they've done number talks in elementary, but is that too elementary for middle school? And I said, you know what? Absolutely not. And I said, I just did my dissertation 2 years ago on that very thing because our engagement in our middle school that I was working with was very low. And because they had just been out of school for quite some time for COVID, their number sense had blackened a little bit. And so now we thought, oh, we can use this here. And so we did. We started implementing number talks. You can implement literacy talks. You can implement social studies talks. But basically, you are giving students a problem, a task, a prompt, a picture, anything, and asking them to think about it. And your prompt for what you want them to do might be different. Ours is a math problem, and it could be images. And they have X number of minutes, and they're to share their thinking and tell us what that looked like to them. And so many strategies are given in such a short amount of time. And the conversations that come out of that are powerful. And so that was just one little way that we were able to talk about how to promote them communicating their thinking. Now, at first, they might have just been communicating it on a whiteboard, or one student communicated it to the whole class. But then you can obviously make it first. I want you to share out with your shoulder partner first. And then I'm going to walk around and I'm going to listen, and I'm purposefully scaffold some of the responses because I in my mind know that I want at least 3 different ways to do this. So Jason, I stole this from you. I take sticky notes and I'll number them 1, 2, 3 so that I don't forget who I give them to. And when I hear one, I'm like, oh, okay. So when I ask for number 3, will you please share your thinking? And I give 1 to 2, 1 to 1. Also, it gives the student time to think about what they want to say when they share out with the class, and they can practice with their partner. So that is one way. And so that has become a very transferable application in all content area teachers that I serve and that I coach, that they can adapt that, and it can become a way and it gives us formative assessment as teachers of how they're doing mathematically, literacy wise, history, either way. Another thing that often I have teachers to do is to put up in their classroom. We have word walls, correct? Well, we also have question walls or question stems or thought points or whatnot. So I'll share with my teachers, what are some starter STEM questions that we can use? If you're just beginning to teach your students how to talk to one another, they might need some question starters to get them thinking, like, will that always work? Or how do you know that? Are you sure? And those are just a couple. But sometimes we will laminate those and put them up on the walls so that when students do get stuck and they're a little bit maybe uncomfortable, they can look up and grab one of those. And as a teacher and you're in class, your discourse with your students is extremely important. And the questions that you ask are very important. And so just having those visible helps both the teacher and the student. It's a win-win. And we are definitely building an environment in our classroom where in that classroom, the environment is such that it supports students' ownership and of their own learning and the learning of others. So they are helping one another become better problem solvers. And that is a powerful thing when it is done correctly.
I love that. I think that's a great tip, something that I definitely want to start doing in my classes. So thank you.
You're very. So to wrap that up, if we can promote communication and critical questions that build deeper understanding and prepare students to approach assessments with clarity and confidence. I'm big on C words, not just because my name starts with it, but we want them to be coherent and consistent thinkers. We want them to be communicators. We want to make sure that they have confidence in their thinking.
And you want them to be curious.
There you go. And that's the lesson. Well, we want them to be curious. Sadly, maybe we should have titled this session C to the fifth power, all of the important C's in an education.
All right. So I want to just sum up the 4 tips that you talked about today to make sure that we are on the same page and that I got what I was supposed to get. So I think the strategies are, we want to create deep thinkers who are curious about what they're learning.
Exactly.
We want to have them actively engage in the tasks that we're giving them. We want to help them self-regulate their own thinking, and we want to help them be able to communicate that thinking and question the thinking of others.
That was beautiful what you said. No, perfect.
Okay, good. Okay, so I'm glad that I got what I was supposed to get out of this. That bell that we just heard means that we're almost out of time. Can you give us our homework of the day?
So yes, your homework assignment is I want you to think on, I want you to select at least 2 of these 4 as a focus area. And I want you to intentionally think about, okay, in the next unit that I create, how could I make sure that I'm creating opportunities for at least 2 of these to occur? I mean, we want them all to occur, but I think if you just focus on 2 at the time, and if that's too much, if you just want to do 1, but to really be purposeful in, maybe your focus is going to be to give them an opportunity to create a project-based learning, or you create a project-based learning activity and them, but then be the ones to participate in it, and it creates curiosity. And at the same time, I'm sure by default, they're going to have active engagement, but you have to plan for it. And so that's why it's so nice. All of our coaching sessions just build upon one another, because teaching and coaching doesn't come in isolation. All of these things are like the moving parts of a clock. They all have to work together, or that clock is not going to turn. We are not going to make the change that we need to make with our teachers and our students if we don't all work collectively together.
Well, thank you so much for that. I think that's a great way to end. I've really appreciated everything you've said to us today. And have a great rest of your day, a rest of your week. And thank you again for coming.
Thank you, Ashley. And I would just add, for your homework, if you would like to share that with me and let me provide you feedback, I would be honored to do so.
Okay, that's good to know. I'm glad that you are willing to do that for us.
Yeah, ma'am. We can put my email in the notes. So they are and this goes to anyone. I'll be happy to.
Okay, thank you. Have a great day. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Wow, those were some really great tips from Christi. Ashley, I'd love to hear kind of your takeaways and how you could take what Christi said and bring it back to your classroom.
Well, I am really excited about a lot of what she said. I love the idea of trying to find ways to make my students more curious about what we're learning. I am always trying to work in like real world. I try not to say real world all the time. Class is real. But outside of class experiences that they might relate to, and just thinking of new ways to do that's always fun. And I'm always trying to make them more independent and more engaged, so that self-regulation in their thinking was really important to me. That I don't want to tell them what to think. I want them thinking. I sometimes tell my classes, I don't care what you think. I just care that you think. So I want to know what they're thinking and like actually the thought process behind it. So those were really great. And of course, I loved her ideas on the exit tickets and the reflection all throughout the class instead of at the end, which is where I tend to have my reflection scheduled. So just some great advice that she gave throughout that I really enjoyed, that I really want to try to use in my class.
Yeah, I love that you picked up on that. Typically, we assess and we think we kind of reflect after the moment, but that idea of in the moment reflection in those cups, the red cup, yellow cup, and green cup, being a tool for kids to reflect and then do something with it versus just give that thumbs up or thumbs down. Sometimes kids will give you that thumbs up.
Yeah.
And it might not really be one.
Yes, I give that thumbs up a lot too. I know that I'm guilty of that. I think I get it. I think in the moment when I listen, I'm like, oh yeah, that makes sense. It's completely different when you actually go to try to do it though. And sometimes that's when I realize I have questions. That's when I realize, oh wait, I thought I understood it, but maybe I don't.
And so that, like, if I can picture in the classroom a red cup and a green cup, and the green, teacher, I can't get to everybody. So I look at a red cup, I'm like, hey, go work with green cup. And all of a sudden that green cup's like, maybe I'm not a green cup, or they learn and because they're regulating themselves. And so I love that self-regulation.
Yes, I thought that was great.
So when I think about this from a coaching perspective, those two are the two tips that stick out to me too. I think about teachers, and I feel like one of our jobs as coaches is to create curious teachers. Have you ever felt like you've gotten into a rut as a teacher, Ashley?
All the time, more than I wish.
Yeah, we get into a routine, and so every time I sit down to plan, these are the 5 things I do. Every
Right.
time I grade papers, these are the things I do. Every time I create an assignment, these are the things I do. So it's our job to create curious students as teachers. As a coach, it's my job to create curious teachers. We're like, I wonder what would happen if I did this instead of this. How would my students react if I did this versus that? So that's my first takeaway for a coach is how can we as coaches stimulate curiosity within our teachers? And then the second one is that idea of self-regulation. I agree with everything Christi says about self-regulation and that kind of midstream metacognition, getting teachers or students to think about their own thinking. As a coach, we need to apply that to our coaching and when we work with teachers. We don't want to just give thumbs up, thumbs down. You got it? We don't want to assume. I want to ask you questions and get feedback throughout a process. If we're planning a lesson, Ashley, together, I don't want to just plan the whole lesson at the end. Got it?
Right.
Right. I want to in the middle. So when we're planning this lesson, this is the first thing we're going to do. What do you think about this opening? How do you think your kids are going to respond to this opening? I'm causing you to think throughout the process and not just at the end.
Makes sense to me. I think that sounds great.
Yeah, we really want to get teachers to internalize things. That's how teachers own their learning. Just like we want students to own their own learning, we want teachers to own their practice too. And sometimes that rut that we get into that rut, we've kind of given up ownership of our learning. Or we let the textbook do it, or we let the district do it because they say we have to be on this lesson on this day, or we let the state do it. But in order to stimulate curiosity, to do all these things, to allow for kids to transfer their knowledge to other things, we have to own it. Same thing with teachers.
I think that sounds great. I think that makes perfect sense and definitely something that I can see in myself doing. Would love for coaches to help me with. So I think that's great advice.
And so I'm super excited about this. Is the first two. This was our first 2-part episode. And this is the first time I can tell you ahead of time is next week, we're bringing Dan Rock back, but he's going to dive deeper into this idea of curiosity. and how to stimulate curiosity within our students. So
I'm very excited. I am excited. First, of course, I'm excited to have Dan back, but also I'm excited to learn more about curiosity because I love that part. And then I'll also get to talk to you next week because even though Dan's back, he's not going to give insights into his own episode. So you're going to come back and help me with that, right?
Oh, great. I'm excited. Thanks for having me back.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing what you think about Dan's episode with me. So,
Awesome.
see you next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of Class Act Coaching, brought to you by the Southern Regional Education Board. SREB is a nonprofit dedicated to improving education from pre-K all the way to PhD and into the workforce. Visit sreb.org for resources on instructional practices, teacher data, career pathways, and more. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow us on social media. You can find us on Facebook at SREB-School Improvement and on Twitter/X and Instagram, both at SREB Education. See you next week.